This is actually one of the winning photos from the Rotor Magazine photo contest. It won first place in the Helicopters at Work category. It's a photo from Julien Botella in France. And this Super Puma is working on a cable repair project for the part of the electrical grid there in France. We actually felt like it really fit today's topic as well. And so we were glad to be able to use it. Human external cargo operations or utility operations, there's always quite a bit of risk. And so assessing the risk ahead of time and mitigating any of the problems is essentially what this webinar is all about today. Let's go ahead and get started. We are pleased that you were able to join us today. Happy 2021, Happy New Year. This has to be a better year than last year, right? We're hoping anyway. We know that your time is valuable, and so we do appreciate the fact that you're joining us. Today's topic is it time to honestly assess your risk? Risk assessment is a huge element for helicopter operations, rotorcraft operations around the world, and so we're pleased to bring this to you today. Our first speaker today will be Chris Hill, who is our HAI Director of Safety. We're glad to have him. And we have Tarek Loutfy, who is the Senior Operations and Flight Safety Manager at GE Aviation. He's also a member of the HAI Safety Working Group and a former chair. He's a safety manager instructor for the KC-10 flight engineer as a flight instructor. Try this again. He's a safety manager and an instructor KC-10 flight engineer for the U.S. Air Force and Air Force Reserve. And he's a former director of safety for Metro Aviation and Baltia Airlines. Chris Young is an aviation insurance professional with Pik West Insurance Agency. He is the executive director for the Tour Operator Programs of Safety, commonly known as TOPS. He's a founder and principal consultant for CY Consulting Solutions. He is the current secretary of the HAI Safety Working Group. He is the outreach team lead for the U.S. Helicopter Safety Team and a member of the CAMP's Aviation and Safety Advisory Committee. We encourage you to ask questions as part of this webinar. As part of your toolbox on the side of your screen, the control panel, there should be a question panel. All you need to do is click on it and open it. It allows you to enter your question into the box. We will try to answer audience questions towards the end of the webinar with as much time as we have left to do it. And with that, I would like to introduce Chris Hill, who is our Director of Safety here for HAI. Chris, would you join us, please? Chris, welcome. Chris, I'm not hearing you. Are you muted?
Now, can you hear me?
There we go.
All right, thank you, Dan. And welcome everyone from around the globe. I understand we have registrations from 20 countries. So thanks so much for joining us for our first webinar of the year. I'm honored to join you and our expert panelists today as we kick off the new year with what we're going to call a risk management reboot. There's something here for everyone, so strap in as I help get the engines cranked up before I hand it off to the real experts. So first off, I'd like to ask you all to indulge me just a moment as I underscore two key aviation events. Let's wind the clock back to the evening hours of December 29th, 1972. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, a Lockheed L-1011 TriStar, was in the final stages of a flight from New York to Miami International Airport. As the flight crew initiated its approach to Miami, they lowered the landing gear handle, but the nose landing gear position indicating light failed to show a proper down and locked indication. The crew abandoned approach, and the captain was cleared to enter a 2,000-foot holding pattern where his crew immediately set out to fixing the problem. But Flight 401 had a much bigger problem, as most of you already know. The TriStar had already began stepping down in a slow descent that was neither detected nor corrected. At 11:42 p.m., Flight 401 crashed into the Florida Everglades, killing 99 of those 163 souls on board and injuring another 75. The captain's last recorded words you see here, "Hey, what's happening here?" reveal how this crew's fixation on that indicator light allowed his aircraft to descend undetected into that Florida swamp. This accident and a similar one 6 years later, almost to the day, forced the airlines to take action and implement cockpit resource management, a training program we have come to know by many names and appreciate for its life-saving potential. Now for something a little bit more upbeat, this day in history. January 7th, 1785. It was the perfect day for flight. Clear skies and calm winds. At about 1 p.m., two aeronauts, Jean-Pierre Francois Blanchard and Dr. John Jeffries, said goodbye to onlookers at Dover Castle, Kent, England, and launched their hydrogen-filled balloon to make history, to be the first to cross the English Channel by air. During that journey, they could barely remain aloft, skimming just above the cold channel waters, where they were forced to jettison all of their ballast, equipment, and most of their clothing. The quote, hang on a second. And can you take it back to, there we go. The quote you see on the slide here was just a guess of the conversation that might have been going on there, something like that. But our intrepid aeronauts had indeed made history, crossing the Calais coast of France at about 3 p.m. and landing in a nearby forest 30 minutes later. So what relevance do these two events to have to a risk management reboot? So here's my take on that. 2020 might have seemed like a slow descent into a swamp for many of you. And 2021 could feel like you're being forced to jettison nearly everything you have just to keep you from settling into the cold water and sinking to the ocean floor. But together, we can remain aloft here in 2021 and even establish a respectable climb if we stay focused on what is most important. I will join my panelists today to offer hopefully what you consider some helpful risk management tips. Mix those in with a bit of resilience on all of our parts, and we can all keep those rotors turning well into 2021 and beyond. All right, let's talk safety. There we go. How would you describe in the most simple terms possible what safety is? Or better yet, what is a safety management system? For some of you, if you threw out that last term to your CEO or your boss, you might get an expression something like what you see here. But really slowing it down and backing it up, how would you indeed describe safety or SMS to a new CEO, vice president, or financial manager? Some of these folks might not give much thought to safety or to SMS. A few have yet to be shown the value of it, and most are not up for a lengthy chat about it. So how would you simplify the case for safety in a way that resonates with them? There's a good chance that the majority of the folks tuning into this webinar today have a general working knowledge of safety and SMS, and we realize that. There's quite a few other folks, this might be something new to them. But for all of us, as we continue to struggle trying to explain the most important concepts to our decision makers in our world of work, you might find yourself faced with this situation. And if you don't already have a successful sales strategy, if you will, then you might want to consider you're asking yourself or your leaders these 3 questions to get you started. You just might find them helpful when making your case for safety. The first question really is quite simple. What keeps you up at night? This gets to the very core of risk management, honestly. It's impossible to manage our risk if we haven't even identified the hazards that give us the most concern. And we're not talking about traditional business or life stressors, but more specifically, when asking an aviation leader, decision maker, or accountable executive, what are the top 1 to 3 hazardous conditions, activities, or behaviors that they think makes them the most vulnerable? The predictable answer might be, Dan, could you go ahead and, the predictable answer might be they are worried about an accident or an incident. Need to go back. All right. So this is the CEO's or the decision maker's question to answer. If it comes from them, it's more powerful. They own it, so they need to really be engaged in this part of the discussion. If they haven't been, and they don't have any ideas, then you might have a little bit more work to do. And if they don't know, I bet their insurance underwriter can give them a few hints. So make it come from them, and and if they can't answer the question, then flip the question on yourself. If they're not ready for this, chances are they're probably going to do that anyways. Be prepared to get that question thrown right back at you. So let's go ahead and think of your top 1 to 3 issues, hazards, or behaviors that might apply in this situation. Okay, let's go. Next slide. Okay, so then thinking of those top 3 questions, what are you doing about it right now? This might be the first time you've identified these issues, or maybe they're well-known issues. In that case, what should you already be doing about it? Okay, so we've identified a few things that we consider as safety issues. Maybe it's a hazardous operation, condition, or behavior. Maybe you've already thought of a few ideas on how to eliminate or reduce that level of risk to an acceptable level for you and your operation. So that brings us to our last question, and possibly the most important one that few of us really have as much of a handle on it. And that is, how do you know it's working? How's that working out for you? If everything you put in place based on what you know about your risk to be today, and then figured out what that is, and how's that working out for you? So you need to test that, have internal checks, something of that sort. So I spent a lot of time just really asking questions, just barely scratching the surface. I know you're clamoring to hear a little bit more from the true experts. So I'd like to invite Tarek Loutfy, who's on deck, to join me on the screen. And as we mentioned earlier, Tarek is currently the Senior Operations and Flight Safety Manager at GE Aviation. Tarek and Chris Young, who will join us later, are both very active participants in AVI Safety Working Group. And I just wanted to thank them personally for their continued support to HAI and the industry overall. The work you do makes us all better and safer. And Tarek, welcome again, and thanks for joining us today. I'll hand it over to you now and join you in a few minutes for our Q&A. So all yours, Tarek.
Thanks, Chris. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from around the world. I am honored to be here with you today. As Chris mentioned, my name is Tarek Loutfy. I want to apologize to all the rotor heads in advance. I went back to the fixed wing community about 4 years ago, and I'll be honest with you, I love both sides of the house, the fixed wing and the rotor wing. As mentioned, just to give you a little bit about my background, been in aviation about 35 years now. Currently with GE Aviation, working in their flight test department. And we're out in Victorville, California. And what we do is test all the commercial engine products before they hit the market. So we have a 747 flying test bed that we test all of the commercial engines. So we remove one of the production engines, and we can sometimes have a smaller engine, a larger engine on there. Currently working on the GE 9X, the world's largest engine for the 777X. So we got some pretty cool programs we're working on. And when you talk about risk management and risk mitigation for us and what we do, it changes on a daily basis. The testing we do changes, the flight profile we do changes, the engines we're testing change. So we spend a considerable amount of time making sure we have the right people in the room to make the right decisions, to make sure that everyone comes home safely to their family. And at the end of the day, to be honest with you, when I'm listening to Chris's discussion, what keeps you up at night, most important thing for me is everyone goes home the same way they came to work. So something to keep in mind. It's near and dear to my heart, as you can imagine. Dan, if you don't mind, I'm going to have you advance the slides. I think I'm going to have the same issue. If you don't mind going to the next slide.
Happy to do it, Tarek.
Thank you, sir. All right, this is an interesting question and something to really think about. Do you really know what's going on in your business, and do you want to know? And this is more geared towards the leaders of the business. Throughout the years, I think a lot of times the leaders are focused a lot on the bottom dollar, the spreadsheet, the managing the business, the shareholders for some of the larger companies. But sometimes, don't spend enough time behind the scenes and understanding what's going on in their business. You hear a lot of times when people talk, they say safety and quality first. A little bit of a chuckle with me with that. Safety and quality is not what a business is there for. It's to make money. It's completely an honest assessment. If your business is making money, the business thrives. The question is, how do your business thrive, and how do you do it safely? And again, so people can home to their family safely every day. Excuse me. And when that happens, I can promise you that the business model will work out. And a couple questions for the the leadership and the team is the expectations we're setting out for our organization, our teams. Are we setting realistic expectations? Are we giving them the tools we need to manage their business day in and day out? The culture that we set up, is it a culture of compliance, or the expectations unreasonable, and we're setting ourselves up for failure? A lot of times people will take shortcuts, they become norms, and 9 out of 10 times they work for you. But what about the one time that it doesn't? It really sets a bad example, and it sets you up for failure at some point in the future. I am fortunate and blessed to work for a company that does what they say, and when they say safety and quality first, they mean it. I have people from around the world sometimes joining me on the flight test, but if the aircraft is not ready to go and all the parameters are met and all the checks and balances are met, we'll cancel the flight and do it again the next day. And 99% of the time that's not the case, but the one time that I raise my hand and say we're not ready to go, I've never get any pushback, and it's truly a good feeling to be working in that environment. It's also something that anyone in our organization has the option to do, raise their hand. They can speak to their manager directly. They can speak to the executive running the entire site. If they're not happy with the answers they get, we have anonymous reporting set up, and safety and quality and EHS directly up to the CEO of the company. So no one at the organization is treated any differently, and no one is expected to look the other way with anything. So it's an honest question for, we're looking at what you did in 2020 and considering what you're doing in 2021. And just because it worked for you in 2020 doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for you in 2021. So back to the question, do you really know what's going on, and do you want to know? Next slide, please. Share with you a accident investigation I did several years ago. This MD-11's in Dubai. I getting old and senile, I can't remember the year, but I'm guessing somewhere between 10, 12 years ago. It was a loading incident. They were taking cargo off, putting cargo on, and obviously too much cargo in the back and not enough in the front. When you peel the layers a little bit, you find out that the loadmaster that was on this aircraft has been on that aircraft for 3 days straight, 3 days straight without getting off that aircraft. He was fatigued, he was tired. As a business, when you look at the regulatory requirements from the FAA in the US, the loadmaster is not included in the crew rest requirements as the pilots are. The pilots have a specific crew rest requirements, but not necessarily the loadmaster. Although the company was well within their legal right, was it a smart business decision? Look at the outcome. And if you look really close by the wing of the aircraft, by the right wing, there's a fuel truck there hooked up that was fueling at the time. So that aircraft was grounded for months. That lease payment on that aircraft was about $700,000 a month, not including the lost revenue for being grounded and obviously not being able to support our customers. Again, legally right, but not the smartest thing in the world to do. This event was my first accident investigation I've done, and it was kind of near and dear to my heart over the years because the fatigue was is a topic that continues to go on and on from around the world. The longer you're up, it's like more like being legally drunk. So there's definitely a correlation there. For our crews here at Flight Test, we're operating under the FAA's Part 91 rules, but the rules that we're operating under are Flight Test Part 91. There's no crew rest requirements. Even though there's no crew rest requirements, we have our crews, including our engineers in the back, that are monitoring the data on the same strict requirements as the airline pilots. So again, not because it's something that the company had to do, it's just a smart business decision, and it allows the folks to have a proper crew rest and be able to sleep anytime. And have, if you show up next day and you're not ready to go to work and you say, you know what, I'm not feeling well, we'll either replace you or try it the next day. It's not a problem. Dan, did we lose the presentation?
Yes, for some reason it's just wanting to fight with me for a little bit. I'm going to try and have it back up here in just a second.
All right, no problem. We'll continue on without the presentation. We talk about some, unnecessary risk companies are taking. And the next slide, once we get it back up, it talks about a basic risk assessment. And for me, I like to keep it simple. The more simple, the more folks are willing to comply with the requirements. It's green, yellow, or red. It's either acceptable, it's acceptable with mitigation, or it's unacceptable. And the decision to make a risk acceptance decision at GE includes everyone. If you are the subject matter expert, you could be the mechanic on the floor, you could be the engineer, you could be a manager. We want your input because we all miss something. Excuse me, there's no way we all have all the answers. In aviation, if you stop learning, it's time to find a new job. I come to work every day with an open mind. I work with a lot of smart people, and the older I get, the more I forget. So the more help we get from one another, the better off we'll be. When you look off at the organizational chart off to the left, it's a little bit large for a larger company, but it doesn't matter how big or small you are. You can come up with a risk assessment that meets the size of your organization. The line manager may be the president, director's managing director, the chief pilot may be the person there. Size it to make it to the size of your organization. The other thing is, if this intimidates you and you're looking to start it and don't know where to start, there's some great resources out there. You can look on the HAI homepage for starting a safety management system, risk assessment, and it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And again, when we're talking about assessing risk, it's something you should be doing not just from the organization, but in your daily life. Years ago in my Air Force days, we had one of our young airmen bought a Ford Mustang, used car, sports one, very quick car, but not realizing the tires that he bought on that car were bald. He decides to go for a joyride. The roads are a little slick, and he hits the gas and winds up spinning out of control and wrapping that car around a telephone pole and killing himself. And my heart goes out because just a proper risk assessment, just analyzing what you're doing on a day-to-day basis could have prevented that unnecessary death. And again, it's, if you look at it from how you live your life, and you look at it from how you live your what you do in your business world, whether you're the president or whether you're the guy sweeping the shop floor, we all figure out a way to manage and assess risk. And please keep in mind that when you're assessing your risk, what you did last year may not work this year. Your organization may have changed, your business model may have changed, you may spend more time in a your division may have grown. So it's really important that tied in within your safety management system or your operation, that you're reviewing what you're doing today to make sure it works for you tomorrow. It's really important. Other areas where I've seen examples of risk assessments that are either poorly done or not being done at all is what's called the management of change. For those who were in a safety management system, they understand what that means is if there's something changed within your business, are you reassessing that risk? If there is if there's a new process, a new piece of equipment, a new procedure, are you looking at it from the completely all around your organization? And then we have the issue sometimes of we have individuals that look at it from their department only and not realizing that it affects other areas. It could affect flight operation. It could affect your maintenance department. So some things to think about when you're assessing risk. Next slide, please. Candor. I love this one. The quality of being open, honest, and expression frankness. In the typical day of businesses, the guy at the top usually doesn't talk to the guy in the middle at the bottom, and usually the guy at the top, or gal, excuse me, could here's the results I'm looking for, make it happen. And in an environment like that, you're setting yourself up for failure. You're setting yourself up for a lot of risks. This is something that our leadership at GE has always been big. Don't tell me what I want to hear. Tell me what I need to hear. I don't want to see a bunch of fancy presentations and PowerPoints. Let's talk meat and potatoes and get down to the business. Our focus should be on the product that we serve. And if we're honest and frank with one another, then we'll be able to provide a better product and support our customers better. It's interesting, I'll share with you a story here. A lot of experience at our site. We engineers here, the drawings, the designs, the tests we're doing. A few months back, we were doing a test on one of our engines, and one of our mechanics on the floor was explaining to the engineer that what he's trying to do in that test is not going to work. So he just ignored him and he kept going, and about 2 weeks later, the engineer found out that what he was trying to do wasn't going to work, and had he taken the input from the mechanic on the floor, it'd have saved him a lot of time and effort because he's done it before. So it's important that you not only talk but listen as well. And you know, it's a good phrase I heard from my manager. He told me his wife told him this years ago, that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth to listen twice as much as you talk. So sometimes I need to take that advice myself and make sure that I'm listening as well as talking. And it's not something that's easy, but it's something that over time will make a much stronger company and make your employees happy. If they're intimidated or not willing to speak up or not willing to talk, then they're not going to willing to help share with you some of the risks as leaders that you really need to hear. Next slide, please. Alrighty, so the chart here displays mishap rate going down over time, and the easiest way to reduce a mishap, if in a perfect world, is to engineer out the hazard. If we can get rid of the hazard, if we can human proof it, then that's the best thing. In reality, that's not always possible. The next best thing would be, you know, the systems we put into place, and then the bottom line is the people actually are doing what they're supposed to be doing. If we focus on the engineering, over the years, the cockpits have gotten a lot more advanced in the aircrafts. The systems have gotten a lot more advanced where they troubleshoot for you and they take a lot of the human error out. It's a double-edged sword when you think about it, because there's folks that rely so much on the technology that they forget sometimes their basic flying skills, and it kind of takes it's a balance between the two. You got to keep sharp, in your skills, but you also have to use the technology and trust it. I grew up in the old era before all the digital world and the old steam gauges, and it's interesting to watch the pilots came from the steam gauge world versus the digital era today. And the older generation usually much better at hand flying the aircraft and working through issues there, and the younger generations are much better in using all the resources available to them through some of the automation to reduce the workload, if you will, and be able to focus on more than one thing. But if you can put the two together, they make a beautiful combination together, because honestly, you need both of them to make it safely home. Another good example for the technology coming a long ways is the cars. I look at the technology in cars now. They will stop themselves before, God forbid, you hit someone or rear end someone. They'll give you a warning on your phone. I saw the other day if you forgot your kid in the back seat, and now they have cameras when you put your turn signal on, and some of the newer ones, and can show you your blind spots right in front of you. So it's really come a long way. In lieu of having all the bells and whistles, if you will, the next best thing is having processes and procedures in place, safety systems in place, and having training to go with it. You can have every safety system in place, you can check all the boxes, but if you're not doing what you say you're doing, then it's going to be just a book collecting dust on your shelf that looks pretty. And the bottom line is the personal behaviors coming from your team are the ones that are going to have to be follow adherence to the guidelines that you put out. Does your company have a culture of compliance? Are we as leaders promoting that culture of compliance? And are we rewarding folks for doing the right things? And honestly, taking actions against those who aren't, because it's a risk to our business. So very easy ways of managing your business. Next slide, please. I read this article the other day from Elon Musk. It's interesting because he talks, and I put the link in there if you want to read it in the future. He talks about too many leaders being the MBA world, spending too much time in office, not spending enough time on the floor and understanding the product that they sell. We touched on that a little bit, and how do we grow the product that we sell? How do we make it better than it is? If we're number one in our industry, how do we stay there? And it's not going to be from behind your desk. You have to come out from behind your desk. You have to get out on the floor. You got to have the people see you, that you're truly interested in what's going on, and that'll send a completely different message. You spending time where the rubber meets the road, and you have to schedule it. I know it's not easy. We get boggled down in meetings. We spend a lot of time in getting things done on a lot bigger scale, but I can't tell you how important it is that the team sees you out there. And it's interesting for myself, if I'm not out on the floor visiting the team, they think I'm not here. If I'm in my office all day and I'm not out spending time with there, Tarek must not be here. Otherwise he would have been down on the floor and checked up on us. So it's a culture that we set for the team. Next slide, please. Alrighty, this is something I have to get a shout out to Metro Aviation. When I was director of safety for Metro about 4 years ago, when we were trying to get more involvement from the employees in the safety department, came up with an idea of a safety promotion poster contest. And we put it out to the entire organization, and we were going to give out a $1,000 prize to whoever won, $500 for a second place winner. And at the end of the day, we were going to take the winners' posters, and we were going to mass produce them and hang them at all the bases across the country. And at the time, Metro had close to 100 bases across the country. So I believe these posters 4 years later are still at the bases. And what you're seeing here, Metro's an EMS operator. The gentleman in the far back is Mike Stanberry, the owner. You see the pilot, you see the medical personnel, the mechanics, everyone working together for the safety to make sure we all get home safely to ourselves. And it was a little unfair, but one of the pilot's sons, a graphic design artist, he came up with this design, but it tells such a great story. So anyway, I thought and you're looking about some sort of involvement from the organization. This is something very simple that you can do, just an example to get more people intrigued in your business safety products. Next slide, please. Alrighty, again, as business leaders, we have to keep the spreadsheets where they need to be. We have to make sure the shareholders are happy. We have to make sure our bills are paid. I get that, but in order for that to happen, you also have to take care of your family. And I truly believe that the employees within your organization are a family, and they need to go home safely to their families. And it's a balance between taking care of the employee and also taking care of the company. If you can figure out this magic balance, you're not going to have just employees working for you, looking for a job. You're going to have people stay with you for 20, 30 years. And there's nothing to represent the experience that you lose when someone walks out the door. I want to thank you for your time. And if you have any questions, I think we'll have some time open at the end. Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tarek. As always, great job. And hello, everybody. Great to be here. Want to thank Chris Hill and Dan Sweet for all the hard work getting this set up, and of course HAI to allow these webinars to occur on a frequent basis. I think it's critical to our industry to help out, provide great information, and be a benefit to all the members and non-members. Dan, are you able to advance the slides for me?
I can indeed, yes.
Thank you, sir.
I think I can. There we go.
Next one. Yeah, so what challenges, right? We know we all have them. They exist. We can't ignore them, but we can certainly work towards assuring that they don't result in a negative outcome. But one of the things that I find interesting is that I think in general, and not just aviation, but other areas of like healthcare, manufacturing, so forth, that we tend to celebrate the absence of negatives, right? And how are you measuring performance at your operation today? Do you take the past success as a guarantee for the future of your future safety? That concerns me, that if that's the case, if that's a true statement, perhaps you could, if you really knew how you're being successful, how those negative outcomes are occurring, and really it comes down to how well you're prepared to carry out the business of the day. One side effect I found interesting in learning about this is that by celebrating that absence of that potential, there's potential for creating a culture of risk secrecy, meaning that we start to focus on that number, right? How many days has gone by without anything bad happening. And depending on your culture at your organization, and again, whether you're large or small, this applies, that potential for risk secrecy means we start to deny or hide the fact that there are problems. Those, probably heard of the issue, the latent factors, latent failures that exist. And so when we start to hide things, then of course, like Tarek and Chris were talking about, those things have the potential to manifest in an outcome that's not desired. You can't let yourself be naive or complacent about safety performance. You've got to know how to measure it. You've got to know how you're doing to really gauge success. And as Tarek mentioned, you need to be very frank with the reality of what your current risk management opportunities and success are. Next slide, please. So errors and mistakes, right? We all are prone to make an error, make a mistake. They occur. Unfortunately, as humans, that's part of our nature. We certainly, in most cases, don't intentionally try to create these errors or mistakes, but they do happen. But one key area, I think, is that the human error is a consequence. It's not the cause in many cases. Errors are shaped and provoked by kind of more upstream workplace and organizational factors that could exist. By identifying an error, it's just merely the beginning of the search for the causes, not the end, right? Pointing fingers, in a culture is not good, right? And certainly understanding why that error occurred is the critical point, right? Only by understanding the context that provoked an error will hope we can find hope to limit that reoccurrence, be able to implement effective and acceptable risk mitigation and risk controls so that they don't occur. The error, just as much as an accident or incident or that might follow, is something that requires explanation. We need to understand. And then another important question becomes, do we have the capacity to absorb a failure or an error or a mistake so that harm does not result? That's challenging, right? We need to create redundancies or multiple mitigation paths that help to absorb that error that might occur, right? So that it doesn't result in immediate harm. Organizations should not be disabled by those errors, right? And so when we talk about resiliency and reliability, just because an error occurs, you should be able to continue on, to absorb that and not have that negative outcome. And so you got to learn how to deal with it. And so again, I mentioned resiliency. It's that ability to anticipate trouble spots, to be proactively looking at where those weaknesses could occur, those latent conditions, if you will. So you've got to identify that. Because of the dynamic nature of aviation, the environment's always changing. And so if we don't have redundancy, we don't have multiple mitigation paths, then the likelihood of a negative outcome is much higher. And one area that's critical in that is diversity, right? To help with that resilience, to have not only diversity in how we handle things, but diversity of people, the diversity of your culture, the diversity of your operations can help there. Next slide, please. And so Chris and Tarek talked about culture. By trying to produce positive outcomes, we do need to understand those informal aspects of the organization. Those behaviors, what those attitudes level of engagements, level of accountability, kind of just, judgments can we make? Can you not advance the slide? Dan, just hit the button to create the next image. There you go. So all of that has a huge effect on decision making and culture. And Dan, if you can click one more button. And of course, all of that has a huge impact on outcomes, whether they're positive or negative, right? And so, think about that tribal knowledge that may exist, some bad habits that we might have, deviations that may occur, hot dogging, if you will, skipping steps. If that's going on, those are those informal aspects that can have a huge impact on performance, and then thus affect how we make decisions, affect how the culture of the organization is. And so one thing about humans is when good outcomes occur, even when we're doing bad behavior, our mind looks at that and considers that acceptable, right? Our brains look at that as a reward, and so, oh, that's good, right? I could probably do that again. And if that continues, that leads to that continuation bias, and you've probably heard of that normalization of deviance, drift into failure. I think Tarek touched on that. So that the more you drift away from a baseline performance, the more likely that your risk controls and risk mitigations are going to work. Someone once said that the culture of an organization is shaped by the worst behavior the leader is willing to tolerate. And I would go farther to say it's not just the leader, it's each of us in that organization, right? Because there is a mutual accountability that exists in our operations. Again, large or small, just a couple of people to hundreds of people, a mutual accountability that we must have with one another and with the organization. Another person once said, described, in the word culture, there's only one R, but there are really three R's, right? It's respect, it's reliability, it's resiliency. Those are kind of non-technical skills, if you will, that we must perfect, we must learn, we must teach and educate in our organizations. We certainly have to have the technical skills to perform well, to fly the aircraft, to work on that aircraft engine, to maintain our facility. But it's the non-technical skills that can have a greater impact. Those behaviors, attitudes, engagement, all of that can have a profound effect. Next slide, please, Dan. So proactive predictability, right? We want our performance to be predictable. And in aviation, that can be really hard. There are certain aspects that, that may occur that seem mundane and routine to us, but remember, the environments that we operate in and work in is very dynamic. At any moment, something different could happen, something different could occur that maybe we didn't anticipate. And thus, when we think about the risk management piece, it's about expectations and understanding what could possibly happen. If it's been easy for you, then I think you've just been lucky, right? Because effective risk management isn't easy. I'm not saying it's hard and that's impossible to do, but it's an ongoing challenge that we must embrace on a daily basis. And so, going back to that absence of negatives, if nothing bad has happened, that's a good thing, of course. But at the same time, how is that goodness occurring? If you don't know, then you're just been lucky, right? Like I mentioned, we want to be predictable. We want to create stability. We want to have capacity to fail safely. We want to create those more margins of safety, if you will, and better solution options, better choices, several choices that we can make in the decision-making process that will yield a positive outcome, and it comes down to that consistency of proactive of habits, right? And so 5 habits that I think are really, really helpful and typically associated with high reliability organizations are preoccupation with failure, right? We don't ignore the bad stuff. We don't ignore the mistakes or errors. We understand what caused them and what happened, that deviation. The reluctance to simplify. Again, we're complex in aviation already. Embrace that complexity. Don't explain the problem as being, oh, that's just what happens because it's so complex, so dynamic. Instead, do the research, do the investigation, if you will, and understand so that you can implement a proper diagnosis. Sensitivity to operations, right? The hands-on experience that goes on by your frontline folks, or you, for small operations, you doing all the work. That's critical to understanding and how to improve upon things. The commitment to resiliency, you have to be able to identify and implement those corrective actions without it having a huge impact on you. And then in deference to expertise, right? Just because I'm a safety manager, just because I'm the director of maintenance, I know a lot, but I don't know everything. And on any given day, the folks that are hands-on are your experts that you need to rely on. Next slide, please. So again, this proactiveness, this predictability is really understanding what's going on, as Tarek talked about. Do you really understand? Do you really know what's happening? And so I think a really easy thing that you can do, and unfortunately gets skipped a lot when you think about safety management, is this idea around the system description or the system analysis, right? When you look at all the international guidance as it relates to implementing an SMS, this is typically that first step, right? That from a safety risk management process perspective is, hey, what do we do? How do we do it? And just a very simple methodology, example up on the screen there, is just to create a flow chart, right? And do that for each of the things that you perform, whether that's a maintenance task like an engine change, or maybe you're doing a patrol flight in the law enforcement side. Anything that you do, and as you advertise all the wonderful work that you do, make sure you understand exactly how that's being done. Again, there's going to be a dynamic component to it, and things will change. But if you can sit down and brainstorm, all right, how do we start this? Well, we start with the crew brief. Then we go to the pre-flight. Then we go to the engine startup, the taxi takeoff. Go through that and then say, or what are the hazards that could be encountered? Now, you may not, in a crew brief, you may not trip and fall, but conceivably, it might happen. During the startup, the reliability of engines is great. Maybe there won't be an engine fire, but there could be. So what are we going to do to accommodate for that, and so forth? You don't have to, at least in your initial analysis, you don't have to identify everything or spend hours on this, but conduct an initial one and then start to review it and revise it and engage all the folks that are involved so that you have a really true picture of what happens. And for you as leaders and owners and process owners, that this can be a huge benefit to you, because you might say, wow, I never knew that this is how it happened. I thought it was this or thought it was that. Very simple process that you can follow to help you be more proactive, be ready, be more predictable. Next slide, please. This is a good one, and I readily admit, I've probably said this before in other presentations. I learned this from my elementary school son. This is something that they talked about at an elementary school level to help their students achieve greater success in their teaching staff and so forth. And it has a huge impact for us as humans, and more importantly, organizations, right? It's the idea that mindfulness is a practice where we as people can learn to focus on the present moment, improve our attentional skills, and accept thoughts and ideas without judgment. Relates to culture, of course, but great ideas that when combined with the organization, it's that shared awareness, right? And that attention from the interactions between all of us in an organization. Remember, when we think about an organization or a system, you know, it's interactive. It's made up of a combination of people, things, and functions. And so understanding the environment as a whole, the system, and all the different effects that could occur through collective mindfulness and raising that awareness can be very, very effective. You know, this approach can lead to ways in which diverse but stable cognitive process, the way we think and interrelate to support the discovery of and the correction of errors that might be occurring, right? You know, it goes back to that accountability, the mutual accountability I mentioned earlier. The more that we are collectively mindful of our surroundings and each other, the greater the awareness and the greater the effectiveness that we can perform. You know, to be mindful doesn't mean to, you know, to think harder or longer. It's just to see more clearly, right? It's going to help result in better decision making, and of course, more positive outcomes and higher reliability. Next slide, please. So when we talked about, you know, Chris talked about the reboot, right? You know, what can we do to really help reboot our risk management process? And I think part of that is, of course, be proactive, right? You know, don't sit back and say, well, we've always been good. You know, heighten that awareness, right? You know, something else that Chris said is like, what are you doing about it, right? So think back to what hazards, what near misses, what close calls did you have in 2020? Certainly it was a dynamic year, no doubt. Review that, make sure you understand what's happening. Maybe you had an audit from an outside third party, or maybe you just have, you know, an internal evaluation methodology that you're using to validate compliance, whether that's OSHA or, you know, FARs, whatever it may be. You know, what were those findings and what was the corrective action plan that you implemented? Is it working? You know, that Tarek talked about and Chris. Maybe it's time to look at new goals and objectives. You know, again, you are a business, right? You make financial objectives, you make financial goals. You should be making safety goals. They're tied to close together. You know, successful safety yields successful financial goals. So look back and see, all right, what are we going to do this year? Maybe you're going to start a new operation location. Maybe you're going to get a new aircraft, right? You know, and as Tarek talked about that change management, right? What's that effect going to be? But understand what you're trying to achieve, and then look at the system, look at your processes that can support that. Because maybe they won't. Maybe you're unable. Maybe you don't have the right people to support that new goal or objective, and start planning that out and be prepared. Another area that I think most people ignore, and not purposely, and I don't mean to be negative, is that emergency response preparedness, that business continuity planning to enable you to absorb that resiliency, to continue operations even after something negative happens, right? Prepare yourself for, hopefully, through all this proactiveness and engagement and awareness, you won't have that situation, but you always need to be prepared just in case. And it doesn't have to be challenging. Just make sure you know who the people are that need to be contacted, how you're going to manage the situation, and so forth. So make yourself ready. And next slide, please. And essentially make it right, right? You know, this isn't easy. As I said, if it's easy, then you've just been lucky. And so stop ignoring it. It's an ongoing journey. You need the right people. I mean, we talked about your culture, those shared values, that they understand you as an owner or senior leader. What are those goals and objectives? And is everyone aligned with that and in support of that? Keep that discussion alive. Communication is crucial. Even when things look good, go back and review. You'll find that can be very helpful. Sidney Decker talks about finding failure in success, right? You know, how are you successful? Because you might find that you're being successful by cutting corners or taking shortcuts, and you want to know about that, right? And never stop looking at how you can do better, right? Do more than what is required. Again, this will actually enable you to celebrate effective risk management. So with that, I end, and I thank you for your time.
All right, Chris, thanks a lot. I'll go ahead and invite Tarek to come join us here for a after hours Q&A. We have a few minutes before the top of the hour. For those of you who are going to have to check off right at a hard stop at the top of the hour, we thank you for joining us here. For those of you who would like to stick around, all 140 plus of you who joined us today, thank you very much, and you're welcome to stick around. I take Tarek and Chris, you'll be available to stick around for a few questions.
Yep, no problem.
Excellent. Well, I'll just get right to it. We had one question from Hario Baradas. Why isn't there a free accessible database of information on the root causes of helicopter accidents around the world? ICAO Safety Management Manual has an excellent procedure for investigating them. Hario, that's a great question. The civil aviation, the commercial aviation safety team, and the ICAO Common Taxonomy team have developed common causal codes for aviation accidents in general. And we have our friends with the FAA who are working diligently to try to increase the number of codes that are in there more focused on helicopter accidents. So if you just type in the word taxonomy ICAO, and it'll take you to the to that website where you can download and access that information. Also, Tarek, Matt Rigsby checking in along with all of his other FAA friends. Thank you for your presentation. I'm sure he thanks you as well, Chris. So,
Thanks, Matt.
All right, so let's get right to it, Tarek. How can we honestly talk about risk management if our leadership is not prepared to hear what, where the organization is missing the mark? Can you share any example where you saw this evolution unfold? You talked briefly about that one engineer incident. Is there any other thing that comes to the top of mind on that question?
It's truly a culture shift. It's a great question. The old school mentality is do as I say, not as I do, has come a long way. And honestly, organizations and leaders are starting to turn with it. Now, it's not something that every leader is on board with. It's something that some embrace a little slower than others, but it's something that's it's work that you're going to have to keep going after to make sure that it's happened. It's much easier when the direction of the organization is heading that way, and it's they hold people accountable to get more involved and more open and more honest. But on the flip side, sometimes it takes something bad happening to someone or an incident or an accident before people realize that, you know what, maybe what I'm doing is not smart. Maybe there's better ways of doing things. And Chris talked about that in his presentation. Just because something bad happens, you don't fold up and go home. How can I go back at it and do better next time? So don't give up. It's something that is constant effort, and I work at it daily, to be honest with you.
Yeah, patience, persistence, resilience, all those things we were talking about. So thanks for that.
Absolutely.
All right, Chris, we'll bounce over to you for a new question from, let's see, Ian Hurst, former Coast Guard colleague. Thanks for the question, Ian. What kind of methods or techniques have you seen for encouraging crew member or employee input into the analysis of hazards or safety threats?
Yeah, that's a great question. That goes to that engagement, the level of engagement. I think culture, obviously, in your organization is key to that. As leaders, we've got to be willing to listen and learn from our frontline employees. And so by having your senior leadership allow that and encourage it to occur is one methodology, right? Talk the talk or walk the walk, right? You can say we have a positive safety culture, but you really have to act in a way that allows for it. Meaning, when people do bring up ideas or issues, you don't knock them down because of that, or you don't ignore that. In risk management, Tarek showed that the risk assessment chart there, that it's a tool to help you prioritize as well, right? And so you can't handle everything, but you can document and take notice of it, right? And act on it when appropriate, determine what the acceptable risk is. But again, to encourage folks to speak up resides at the top, right? And making sure that everyone knows that they're valued, their opinion is important, and that they're recognized as subject matter experts. You can do some encouragement through, Tarek mentioned the poster contest. You can gift cards, things like that can help encourage folks to participate. But ideally, the most effective way is to have a culture that is respectful, and employees know that's the situation.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chris. We got a question from Kenneth. Everybody's got different ways of cracking this nut, if you will. You talked about technology and people and culture. The sequence and how you attack that is debatable. The best upgrades, he comments, is training through knowledge over technology, and certainly he's right on the mark there. A point about how do we deal with pilot decision making through technology? Either one of you jump on that. Tarek, you first.
Pilot decision making through technology, and I hit on it a little bit during the presentation. There has to be a balance between the pilot skills and overusing the technology. There was recent accidents where the aircraft was doing something that the pilot wasn't sure what was going on, and he let it drive him in the wrong direction. And the reality of it is, if it's the airplane's not doing, or the helicopter is not doing what you want it to do, you go back to the basics. You turn it off and you hand fly the thing until you figure out what's going on. I am a big component of using the technology because we're task saturated. We got a lot going on in that cockpit, and use it when you can. But if it's not doing what you want it to, turn it off and go back to the basics. And we've got to keep our pilot skills sharp, but be smart enough to utilize the technology to reduce your workload a little bit.
All right, Chris, I think you crushed that. We can move on to the next question. What do you think?
I was just going to say, if I could, there's always that concern of information overload, right? And so, to Tarek's point, sometimes you've got to go back to the basics. There's so much great technology, so much great data that's available to help for the purpose of improving performance. But we as humans do get overloaded with our task saturated. So sometimes just that simplistic, aviate, navigate, communicate that we've all learned about can be very helpful for a brief moment to kind of reset yourself, reboot, as the theme today says, and then start to tackle one thing at a time.
Yeah, that's great. Hey, Tarek, we had an interesting question that came in regarding the use of technology to monitor folks that are in the workforce using telemetry, things of that nature. Is there anything that you can share in-house baseball, if you will, on what you guys are doing using tech on the maintenance floor to manage people's fatigue or their movements and their procedures?
We track it digitally through some computer programs here. We look at the risks over time for some of the incidents. Specifically, if we had an incident involving, if we look at 2020 and we look at incidents that were relevant around fatigue, then what do we do to mitigate it, and how do we do better moving forward? And a few things that came out of that is the fatigue risk management plan that we came together for pilots, engineers, as well as the mechanics. We've had specific levels of approval for the leadership, up to 8 hours normal duty day, up to 12 hours manager approval, and anything above that would have to go to the next level up to approve it. So you're taking ownership in the decision-making process. Also, when we're talking about working within some of the longer hours, we have 100% buy-off if you can have someone else overlook your work, whether it be an inspector, if you're a helicopter mechanic out there in the field and you have no one but yourself, you can ask the pilot to take a look. Sometimes working the elements, backside of the clock, it's always good to have a second set of eyes. The company, for some of the technology, the engines are so smart these days that they send signals down to the operations team before they even land, and they tell them there's an issue, so they can have actually parts and people ready to keep that aircraft moving. And a lot of money on the ground if they're not flying. A lot of things out there available.
All right, good. Well, it's 5 after the hour. I'd like to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll shoot for a stop at later than 10 after. So I got a really good question here from Stephen Guberski. We'll let you take this on, Chris. When pursuing or discovering new types of aerial work, that hasn't been done before? This is right on point with, people doing new operations. What steps would you recommend people take to help identify those hazards? And specifically, how would you put an hourly requirement for experience on something that hasn't even been done before?
That's a great question. Probably we're seeing that with new types of aircraft, UAS, UAV, of course, right? As Tarek mentioned earlier, the process of change management or management of change, however you want to describe it, when you're doing something new, you've got to sit down, you got to get into a room and a whiteboard and start brainstorming. If there's something you've never done before, then you got to take the time to plan for it. Of course, you got to sit down, not just by yourself, but with the team that's going to be involved, and just think about it. Again, as I described that flow chart, that walk yourself through it. You may not know exactly every element of that process right now, but at least starting to plan it out, understand what your needs are, what the equipment that's going to be required, what training, of course, that will be necessary. Again, start the process. It doesn't have to be perfect right away. You're going to fine tune it, and then as you start to perform, make sure you build in some checkpoints that you can pause and reevaluate. This is what we thought was going to happen. This is what we thought how it could occur. Something changed. We didn't account for that. We didn't understand this. And if you're going to be doing something that involves people outside of your organization, outside your operation, include them in this process, right? If you have a ground crew that you'll be working with that maybe is a third party, make sure at least someone from that team is part of your team in the process of looking at how to implement a new process, a new task that you're going to be doing.
All right, good one. So I'll go and close out with this question here from Tim Booth. It's a great question. Do you have any examples of incentive programs that you have seen work to encourage participation in SMS? I'll offer up one and then kick it to each of you for a closeout. It's kind of like a good cleanup shot here. This works differently for every company and organization, but this is the toughest one for some people to crack, but it could be the easiest. If they just take a look at the consequences of an accident, if it were to happen, and put a monetary value on that and compare that to the cost of awards and incentives program for suggestions and ideas or submitting information, then you'll find very quickly that it's well worth the investment in that. So that's been found to work with some organizations I've worked with in the past. Having an incident reporting system or a hazard reporting system or issue reporting system, and ensuring you respond to every single issue that's submitted, no matter how mundane or whatever it might be, and just acknowledging and showing appreciation for those submissions, and really going overboard to ensure that people get the recognition for being a participant in the program. Watch how quickly people will pile on once they start seeing the response to that. It's really the impetus for a proper SMS is a strong reporting culture as well. So I'll kick it to you, Chris. Any other ideas on how people can get involved in improving their SMS?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's involving all those subject matter experts, including them in the process. Especially when something goes wrong, ask them, well, what do you think would help to improve this? And then, again, that culture piece, if you want to really, recognize somebody, give them a parking spot right by the front door. If you're the owner, change the name for Joe Smith for a month. And let that individual park there. Write an article about who they are and their family and put it in the local paper. To the point of recognition, say, how you value your people is critical, and that creates success.
Awesome stuff. And Tarek, outside of a poster contest that you've certainly worked pretty well for you, any other thoughts?
I like everything that was shared. If you're a small operator out there and you're struggling whether to get started on the SMS process or not, I would suggest to you that the stuff that's out there off the shelf, if you will, are helping you manage your safety the same way you would manage your entire business, and it's taking the guesswork out. Take as much of it or as little of it as you want, but customize it to your organization and your shop, if you will. As far as the engagement from the employee side, us in particular, we're always looking for acknowledging folks from going over and above, doing the right thing. That could be from our SMS, it could be from our EHS, it could be from our quality system. It's just a matter of sometimes there's a monetary gain that we give folks in the sense of an award. Sometimes it's a thank you. Sometimes it's we have a safety board that we update with some of the great things people do. So the things you can do are endless. So we just got to use a little imagination.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in it right there, gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us today. Both of you have done a great job to participate in this. Dan is going to join us and close things out. But before I go, a shameless plug. If you're looking for more safety information to inform you and what you're, to get your SMS off the ground, I invite you to go to rotor.org/safety. There's lots of resources there. We're going to continue to improve the site over the year, but one of the first links you can get to is the Spotlight on Safety promotion program, where both Tarek and Chris have participated in recent spotlights. And today, Rex Alexander has given us some good advice on landing off airport at unfamiliar locations. Check it out and offer your ideas at safety@rotor.org. That is all. I will go ahead and sign off, ask Chris and Tarek to sign off as well, and we'll leave it with Dan to close it up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Dan, you're on mute.
And you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay, there we go. Do appreciate Chris and Tarek joining us today. We always appreciate it when industry experts are able to come on and share their subject matter expertise with us. That's been one of the high points of our webinar series. Do appreciate the connection we have with the topic today with bringing up risk management, and we are obviously coming up with HAI Heli Expo 2021 in New Orleans fairly soon. The HAI management team is basically using a risk assessment tool. It's not a tool as such, but they are evaluating the situation for New Orleans. They're taking in the information from the various World Health Organizations, the CDC. They are monitoring the situation. They're working very closely with the people of New Orleans, the people at the Ernest N. Memorial Convention Center. It's one of the first convention centers in the nation that achieved GBAC standards for global health, health and sanitation standards. We are aware that there are risks, but we are also aware that we are mitigating the risks, and we feel very confident and very comfortable in holding the convention at the end of March. We would like to share this information on the safety with you. If you visit www.heliexpo.com, there is information about the convention center, about the safety protocols we have in place. We are really looking forward to seeing everybody that can make it at the end of March. The show dates are March 22 through 25, and the exhibit hall is going to be open March 23 through 25. For everybody that can make it, we really look forward to seeing you there soon. Coming up next week, we have Aviation Media Roundtable. We're going to do a review of 2020 and a forecast for 2021. We had thought about trying to bring some specific subject matter experts in for this webinar, and then realized that our friends in the aviation media, they have their fingers on the pulses of every part of the aviation industry. And so we thought, who better than them to come in and discuss what we've seen and what we can look forward to in 2021. January 21st, we have a webinar, Off Airport Landings, managing those with Bowtie. All of our webinars are 4 p.m. Eastern time. There will be one coming up in February that's a bit later, but we will get to that soon. That's watch for the link in email, through social media, and in Rotor Daily, of course. We do have a questionnaire that will be coming to you shortly. We do follow those questionnaires. We do follow the responses. One of the questions very specifically is, what subjects do you want to see in upcoming webinars? That is of great interest to us. We always want to make sure that we're serving our audience as best we can. If you do have questions or comments about HAI in general, please let us know. The best way to do that is through our president@rotor.org email address. Send us your challenges, your questions, your comments, your thoughts, your input. We look forward to reading all of that. Jim Viola, our president and CEO, does see every one of those emails, and he does task our various employees with those responsibilities. We do appreciate your taking the time today. Our webinar is now concluding. Until next week, we ask that you be safe, you fly safe, and we'll see you soon.